Chapter 1. The morning light arrived shyly in Alder Creek, casting a pale gold glow through the fog that clung to the hills like a forgotten dream. Wind stirred through the pine tops, gentle and cold, as though the land itself was still waking. At the edge of that quiet valley, where the fields rolled like waves and the tree line thickened into forest, an old man walked alone with his dog. His name was Everett Langley. 67 years of age, stooped slightly at the shoulders, silver in his beard and silence in his step. To the people in town, he was just Everett, the widowed farmer who kept to himself, who sold wild honey at the county market and brought fresh eggs to the church kitchen every Sunday. But to a different world, a world that no longer wrote things down, he had once been known as Spectre, a name only whispered in the deepest shadows of forgotten conflicts. The dog trotted beside him, a black-coated mutt with intelligent eyes named Tundra. She never strayed more than a step from Everett's side. That morning, as they reached the edge of the south field, she froze. Her ears lifted, her body tense. Everett followed her gaze. The dew was still clinging to the grass, but the soil beneath it told a different story. Tire tracks, deep, recent, unfamiliar. He crouched down, brushing his fingers along the grooves. Not local. He knew the sound and shape of every truck that passed through Alder Creek. And this was different. Heavy tread, military style. His breath curled in the chill air as he stood slowly, the wheels in his mind already turning. Tundra growled just once, and then fell quiet. "Not today," Everett murmured to her. "Let's keep walking." At the edge of his land, an old cedar fence separated his pasture from the gravel road, and parked just beyond it, kicking up dust as it idled, was a familiar truck, rust-worn and stubborn, driven by someone who hadn't been by in weeks. Hazel Lorne stepped out from the cab. Sheriff's deputy, part-time EMT, and one of the last people Everett trusted to speak straight. She wore her brown Stetson low, her badge half covered by a red flannel jacket. Her boots hit the dirt with purpose. "Everett," she said, nodding. "You seen anything strange this morning?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of strange?" She leaned an elbow on the fence, worry creasing her brow. "The Michaelas are gone. Overnight. Packed up without a word. Place looked like it had been tossed. Their goats were still in the barn, for God's sake." Everett's jaw worked slowly, but he said nothing. Hazel continued. "And I passed a black van near Stillwater Ridge. No plates. Windows so dark I couldn't see a thing. It turned up past the lake road, toward your direction." He simply said, "I saw tracks." Hazel didn't flinch. She knew Everett never wasted words. "Town's been whispering," she said after a pause. "Someone's buying up properties under fake names. Big money, too. No one local could pay what they're offering. But if folks don't sell, well, things start going wrong. Generator fires. Lost dogs. Missing mail. Small stuff, until it's not. Sheriff doing anything?" He's spooked. "Won't say it, but I see it in his eyes. Whoever they are, they've got deep pockets and long reach. I think the Michaelas got pushed hard." Everett nodded. "It's starting." Hazel looked at him sharply. "You knew." "I've been watching." She took a slow breath. "I'll stay alert. But if they come knocking, Everett, be careful." "I always am," he said quietly. When she pulled away, the tension didn't leave the air. It lingered like smoke that hadn't yet found fire. Everett returned to the farmhouse, a wide, weathered building tucked into a hill like it had grown there. Inside, he moved with slow precision, pulling back a faded rug and lifting a trapdoor hidden beneath. The stairs creaked faintly as he descended into a basement few had ever seen. It was more than a cellar. This was a bunker, a relic of another life. The walls were lined with metal lockers, sealed crates, and electronic gear that hadn't seen the light in over a decade. He flipped a switch, and the overhead bulbs flickered on with a soft hum. He opened one of the cases, revealing rows of carefully maintained weapons and communications equipment. Old tools. Trusted ones. He sat at a steel desk and opened a weathered black notebook, turning to a page marked only with a single word, Holloway, and he began to write. Later that day, as dusk swallowed the valley, Everett stood on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Tundra lay at his feet, ears alert, eyes on the road. The hills were calm, a deceptive kind of calm, like a still lake hiding something beneath. Then headlights appeared in the distance. 3 vehicles, all black, no license plates. They stopped at the gate. Everett stepped down from the porch. Slowly, deliberately. His gait the rhythm of someone who had seen too much to be startled anymore. The first vehicle door opened, and out stepped a man in an immaculate charcoal suit, polished boots, and sunglasses, despite the fading light. "Mr. Langley," the man said with a smooth accent Everett didn't recognize. "Beautiful property you've got here." Everett said nothing, just sipped his coffee. "We represent a private investment group," the man continued, gesturing with manicured fingers. "We're very interested in acquiring land in Alder Creek, particularly yours." "Not for sale," Everett said evenly. The man's smile didn't fade, but his tone cooled. $3 million cash. More than generous. Still not for sale. The man nodded, as if he expected that. "That's unfortunate. Progress is coming to this valley, Mr. Langley. With or without your blessing." Everett's eyes drifted across the other vehicles. 2 more men had stepped out. One was walking the fence line. The other was peering toward the barn. Subtle but sloppy. "You and your people," Everett said slowly, "picked the wrong place." The man's smile vanished entirely. "You'll regret saying no." Everett turned, walking back toward the porch. "Only thing I regret is not planting more tomatoes this year." The man hesitated, then slipped a card from his pocket, leaving it on the fence post. "You have until sunset tomorrow." As the cars rolled away, Everett knelt beside Tundra. The dog's hackles were raised. "We've got work to do, girl," he whispered. He didn't go inside. He went to the barn and opened the floorboards. The ghosts of Spectre were coming back. Chapter 2. The night air in Alder Creek had a particular stillness to it, the kind that settled on the skin like a whisper. In the distance, coyotes sang their lonely chorus, and the trees rustled with the subtle rhythm of wind rolling in from the north. The moon hung low over the valley, casting long shadows across Everett Langley's fields. He was beneath the barn again, crouched over the open panels in the floor, moving like a man who remembered everything he once was and never quite stopped being. The scent of dry soil and old cedar surrounded him. His hands moved with the calm, mechanical grace of habit, laying out gear on a steel workbench, one item at a time. A field radio, wrapped in oilcloth and silent for nearly a decade. A black case with no markings, containing 4 satellite phones, each still functioning. An envelope sealed in wax, unbroken until now. He opened it with steady hands and drew out a folded sheet of paper. Coordinates, names, call signs, the old network. He took a deep breath. Then, one by one, he began to dial. The first line rang only once. "Rook," answered a gravelly voice. "It's Langley," Everett said. "We've got a situation." There was a pause. The line crackled. "After all these years, they're moving into Alder Creek. Organized. Armed. I'm sitting on the crossing point. They want this land." A longer silence followed. Then, "How many?" "Too many to guess from a handshake. 3 vehicles today. Recon, dressed up like business. The ones behind them won't come talking." "You calling the team?" Rook asked. "I am now," Everett replied. "Full call-in." One by one, as the clock ticked into the dark hours, Everett dialed. He spoke with Shaw, the quiet one, reconnaissance, infiltration, cold as ice. Then with Calder, whose hands had built more explosive traps than fences in his life. And finally June, their medic, their conscience. Always reluctant to come back, but always the first to arrive. No one questioned it. They'd all felt it coming, some final moment. The call they thought might never come, but had never entirely ruled out. They had drifted to quiet lives, scattered across distant towns and quiet jobs. But when Everett called, they answered. By dawn, they were on their way. While the roads lay empty and the world slept, Everett took to the hills. Tundra trotted ahead, nose to the wind, ears twitching at every shift in the forest's rhythm. The ridge overlooking the western treeline had always been his watch point. An old fire tower had once stood there before it fell in a storm years ago. Everett had built a crude shelter in its place, disguised beneath brush and bark, reinforced with steel beams sunk deep into the stone. He climbed the hill slowly, pausing often to listen. Not for deer or birds, but for footsteps. Engines. Movement that didn't belong. At the top, he opened the hidden compartment beneath a pile of cut logs. A black rifle case, untouched in years, still sealed with military tape. He checked the contents: precision rifle, scopes, rangefinder, spare batteries, and a thermal scope. Everett had trained for the desert, for dense jungle, for terrain that swallowed men whole. But these woods, they were his home. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every sudden silence, he read them like a soldier reads a battlefield. Because that's exactly what this was becoming. Back at the farmhouse, He spent the rest of the morning walking the property line again, not as a farmer, but as a tactician. He traced paths through the woods and along the river's edge. He marked out choke points, natural kill zones, narrow passes between trees, hidden elevation changes. The old well, long dry, could be a fallback shelter. The fence that ran along the north edge, a natural boundary for movement. His barn, designed years ago with more than livestock in mind, was already prepared. People in town thought he built it extra strong to withstand snowstorms. They weren't entirely wrong. Inside, he opened a floor panel beneath the tractor and inspected the steel plates bolted into the foundation. Reinforced walls, soundproofing, an emergency ventilation system. It wasn't a barn. It was a bunker in disguise. And still he worried. He wasn't 30 anymore. He hadn't run drills in years. But his hands remembered the way a weapon fit. His breath stayed steady in crisis. And when he lay down in bed that night, his last thought wasn't fear. It was focus. The next morning, the knock came. Soft at first, then firmer. Everett opened the door slowly. Tundra sat stiffly at his heel. On the porch stood a man with sandy hair and square shoulders beneath a worn coat, boots still dusty from travel. "Shaw," Everett said. "Didn't expect you first." "I never left," Shaw replied. "Been living off-grid east of Elk River. Just needed the reason." Everett stepped back to let him in. "Well, this is the reason." One by one, over the next hours, the others arrived. Calder's Jeep rolled in with tools strapped to the roof and a tired grin on his face. June followed in a white station wagon, eyes sharp, already sizing up the terrain. She hugged Everett with both arms, the only one who ever did. By evening, they sat together in the barn, a map of the valley spread out over a stack of hay bales. Markers, pins, circles, notes scribbled in shorthand only they understood. "We've got 4 approaches," Everett said, his finger tracing lines on the map. "They'll come from the east first. That's where they're buying land. But they'll hit from the west when they want control." "How long?" Shaw asked. 2 days. Maybe less. The ones who visited yesterday. That was just their hello. Calder leaned forward. "Then we give them a better one." That night, as clouds rolled across the moon and wind whispered through the trees, Everett stood on his porch again, watching the dark road below. Tundra was at his side, silent. The others were inside, checking gear, building traps, preparing defenses. He sipped from a black coffee mug and watched 2 crows land on the edge of the fence, their wings spreading wide in the moonlight. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Chapter 3. Morning came with a heavy stillness. No birdsong. No wind. Just a dull gray light filtering through the low-hanging clouds, casting everything in a cold, colorless hush. Inside the barn, Everett Langley stood at the workbench, sharpening a blade with long, steady strokes. The rasp of metal against stone echoed faintly in the quiet. Beside him, Shaw spread out a newer satellite map, printed from one of Everett's systems. A quiet favor called in from an old friend who worked on the edge of legality. "Take a look here," Shaw said, pointing to the lower quadrant. "That access road near the old Peterson Mill? Been seeing more tire patterns than last week. Unusual ones." Everett didn't glance up. "You walked it. Last night. 4 pairs of boot prints. Too far apart to be hikers. No one's using that trail except maybe elk, and these weren't hooves." Everett set the knife down and moved closer to the map. "Observation post?" Shaw nodded. "Probably. Short term. They're watching the road in and out of your south field. Won't be long before they test the boundary." From the far end of the barn, June emerged with her sleeves rolled up and a pen tucked behind her ear. She had repurposed the old tack room into a small command center, part med station, part intelligence desk. Radios, encrypted tablets, local emergency frequency scans. Nothing moved in Alder Creek without her knowing. "They're communicating by burst transmission," she said, sitting cross-legged on a stool. "Encrypted. Not cartel level, higher. Corporate. Contractors." Calder asked from the loft above, where he was coiling detonation wire like it was rope for hay bales. "Maybe," June said, "or someone acting like them." Everett crossed his arms, face unreadable. "Doesn't matter who they say they are. Doesn't change what they're doing." He walked to the barn's side door and opened it slowly. The field stretched out before him, quiet and undisturbed. A light mist clung to the ground, swirling gently with every step he took. Calder called from above. "You want me to wire the perimeter today or wait?" "Wait," Everett replied. "Let them make the first move. No need to tip our hand. That afternoon, they began their silent work. Calder surveyed the North Road, planting small motion sensors disguised as wildflowers. He moved carefully, like someone painting, his wire twisted beneath moss and brush, his sensors hidden beneath old stones, marked by memory and nothing more. Shaw took to the ridge again, this time placing hidden optics, passive, non-transmitting, nearly impossible to detect. They fed back to a single server beneath the farmhouse, buried under 7 feet of concrete and silence. Everett and June worked side by side in the barn's lower level, modifying standard hunting gear into multipurpose traps. Tripwires disguised as animal deterrents, flares hidden in fence posts, defensive lights with heat-triggered activation, rigged for disorientation rather than damage. "This isn't about killing them," June said softly, her hands tightening a bolt on a pressure plate. "Not yet." "No," Everett agreed. "Not unless they force it." She looked at him a moment. "They will, though." He didn't answer. As dusk settled again over the valley, the team gathered in the old farmhouse kitchen. The kettle hissed on the stove, and the room smelled of coffee and cedar wood. The fire crackled in the hearth, though no one sat close to it. Shaw spoke first. Intercepted chatter. "They're calling this place Node C." "What's that mean?" Calder asked. "Means there are more," Everett said quietly. "Other nodes. Other targets." June set her mug down. "So we're not just defending this valley. We're part of a bigger picture," Everett said. "But that's not our problem. Ours is right here." Calder leaned back in his chair. "I say we take the fight to them." Night Op hit the post they set up near the mill. "Scare 'em off." Everett shook his head. "Not yet. I want to know how far they'll go. Let them come to us. Let them think this place is just a stubborn farmer's land." There was silence for a moment. Then Shaw added, "They'll test us first. A small incursion. Something quiet." "I know," Everett said. "That's why you're taking first watch." Later that night, rain began to fall. A light, whispering drizzle that soaked into the earth without sound. In the field, among the trees, a dark shape moved. Not an animal. Not local. It crept along the edge of Everett's south pasture, slow and low, avoiding open ground. Then another shape followed. And another. 3 figures in all, dressed in dark gear, each carrying small duffel bags. No guns visible, but none needed to be. They worked in silence, placing sensors. Small electronic devices meant to map activity, signal movement, relay data back to whoever was watching from farther away. In the barn, a single red light blinked. One of Calder's motion sensors, the silent kind, had tripped. Inside the farmhouse, Everett stood from his chair. "Tundra," he whispered. The dog lifted her head. "Time to say hello." Outside, the rain fell heavier now, drumming softly on the tin roof. In the distance, lightning flashed over the hills. And from the darkness, a voice called out, "Leaving things in my field is impolite." The figures froze. One turned, startled. Another dropped his bag. Everett stepped into the clearing, shotgun slung at his side, Tundra growling low at his heel. He didn't raise his weapon. Didn't need to. The silence was louder than thunder. "You've got 30 seconds, Everett said. "Then I call friends." The lead figure hesitated. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands. "We're leaving," he said. "No trouble." Everett nodded. "Walk slow. One at a time. Leave the gear." They obeyed. When they were gone, Everett approached the duffel bags. Inside, he found a handheld scanner, a satellite transmitter, and tucked inside a side pouch, a photo. It was an aerial image of his barn, dated 3 weeks ago, stamped with a logo he didn't recognize. He stared at it for a long time. Then he walked inside, poured another cup of coffee, and added a new line to the map on the table. They weren't just watching. They were planning. And now, the clock had started. Chapter 4. The following morning broke through a blanket of fog, thick and unmoving, as though the world was caught between sleeping and waking. The first sunlight filtered down in weak streaks through cloud and pine, turning Alder Creek into a landscape of shadows and silver outlines. Everett Langley sat alone on the porch, elbows resting on his knees, a steaming mug held between weathered hands. Tundra lay at his feet, head resting on her front paws, eyes never leaving the forest line. They both knew it, something had shifted. The 3 intruders from the night before had been just the beginning. Not scouts, not a warning. They had come with equipment meant for long-term occupation. Gear you use when you're preparing to take, not just watch. He'd left the duffels untouched. save for photographing every piece of tech and tagging their transmission signatures. June would dissect them today. She was already at her desk before dawn, soft jazz humming through her headphones as her fingers danced across the keyboard. In the barn, Calder was laying out new wire spools, his lips pressed into a straight line. He didn't hum or whistle while he worked. His mind was entirely with the circuits and switches. Today's project was something a bit more persuasive. Pressure plates, flashbangs, non-lethal perimeter deterrents. But they could be adjusted quickly if the situation changed. From the South Ridge, Shaw called in. Movement. Everett's radio crackled with quiet static. Then came Shaw's calm voice, slow and steady. 3 SUVs. Unmarked. They're moving like they own the road. Not stopping. Heading toward town. Everett answered without pause. Let them pass. Let's see where they go. A pause. Then Shaw added. Second group just parked near the old mill. That's not a test anymore. In Alder Creek's modest downtown, little more than a strip of buildings framed by mountains and old oaks, the black SUVs pulled up to a stop beside the gas station. Dust settled around them, curling along the tires like mist drawn to warmth. Out stepped 6 men, all dressed too sharply for this place. Not suits, but not ranch clothes either. Tactical boots, expensive sunglasses, and jackets that concealed things. They stood for a moment, looking around like predators trying to decide which direction the wind was blowing. One of them entered the gas station. Another strolled casually to the hardware store, glancing at the camera above the door. They didn't buy anything. They didn't need to, just letting people know they were there. Inside the cafe across the street, Hazel Lorne watched them from a window seat. She didn't reach for her radio. Instead, she stirred her coffee with exaggerated calm. Her sheriff's badge was clipped to her belt, visible, deliberate. When one of the strangers locked eyes with her through the glass, she met the look with a tilt of her head and no expression. Later that afternoon, she called Everett. They're marking the town. Nothing overt. Just quiet pressure. You can feel it. Anyone speak to them? Everett asked. Only Mr. Greeley, she said. They offered to buy his garage. He laughed, told them to go back to California. One of them smiled and said, We'll be neighbors soon enough. Silence lingered for a beat. Anything you want me to do? She asked. Stay visible, Everett replied. But stay out of their way. Hazel hesitated. I'm not afraid of them. I know, Everett said softly. That's why they'll underestimate you. That night, the team met in the barn. A map of the valley was pinned to the wall now, layered in red string and notations. June had drawn out grids based on known approach routes, while Calder marked positions with colored pins, blue for traps, green for recon, black for fallback zones. They're setting up a permanent post by the mill, June said. Dropped a portable tower, they're going to start mapping radio frequencies. Probably already are. They'll find us, Calder said. Eventually. Then we make it hard, Shaw replied. He pointed to the west trail. They're going to probe here next. Maybe a team of 5. Light gear. Just enough to test the water. Let them come, Everett said. He pulled open a locked cabinet and lifted out a weathered field journal. He opened it, revealing sketches, hand-drawn traps, old layouts from missions decades past. I've seen this before, he said. Different continent. Same tactics. He tapped one of the sketches, a design for an ambush route disguised as an irrigation trench. We're going to welcome them properly. The following evening, the rain returned. Not the gentle drizzle from days past. This was a cold, heavy pour that drummed across rooftops and soaked through denim in minutes. Thunder rumbled far off in the hills, distant but moving closer. Under the cover of that storm, they came. Just as Shaw predicted, a 5-man team, moving through the western trail, silent and efficient. Night vision goggles, suppressed weapons, pack radios. They slipped between the trees with the rhythm of practiced soldiers. No light, no sound, just motion. Calder, lying prone beneath a low thicket, watched them pass within 20 feet. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He simply waited. When the last man stepped over the wire he'd laid beneath the moss, Calder pressed the switch. There was no explosion. Instead, a flare burst upward, white and blinding, illuminating the entire trail in a flash that disoriented all 5 men. They stumbled, shouting. 2 dropped their gear. One raised his rifle and fired wildly into the trees. Another hit the ground, covering his face. From the ridge above, Shaw's voice echoed calmly. Stand down. You're surrounded. Panic took the lead. One man ran, directly into a net snare that lifted him off the ground and spun him sideways. Another drew his sidearm, only to be hit squarely in the chest with a non-lethal impact round fired from the barn's upper deck. It was over in less than a minute. June arrived from the tree line, her pistol drawn, eyes cold. Everett stepped from the shadows, shotgun at low ready. Tundra padded beside him, calm as ever. The three remaining intruders dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Everett didn't speak at first. He walked to the man in the center, the only one who hadn't tried to run or shoot. He looked older than the rest. Sharper eyes. He was watching everything. "Name?" Everett asked. The man didn't answer. Everett nodded. "That's fine." He turned to June. "Let's check their gear." One of the men, shaken younger, finally spoke. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who we work for." Everett turned to him. "You've already made 2 assumptions. I wouldn't recommend a third." Back at the barn, the team cataloged the intruders' equipment. The SATCOM gear had a serial range Everett hadn't seen since his time embedded overseas. June narrowed her eyes as she worked. "This isn't cartel tech," she said quietly. "This is military contract surplus. US-based, maybe not even black market. Could be government-run under private cover." "So what are they doing here?" Calder asked. Everett didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the man who'd refused to speak and crouched beside him. "You didn't come here to scare a farmer," he said. "You came here because someone told you this land mattered." The man didn't flinch. Everett continued, "Tell them this. If they want this land, they'll have to come themselves. And they won't like what's waiting." After the prisoners were blindfolded and escorted off property, dropped at the edge of county land under cover of darkness, the barn fell silent again. Shaw leaned against the wall. "They'll come in force next time." "They already planned to," Everett replied. "Now they'll just do it louder." Calder glanced toward the map. "Then it's time." June looked at Everett. He gave a single nod. "Call the others," he said. Chapter 5. By dawn, the valley had returned to a deceptive stillness. The clouds had lifted overnight, and for a few fleeting hours, Alder Creek looked like a postcard. Clean sky stretched wide over golden fields, trees swaying gently in the breeze, and distant hills glowing under the soft touch of the morning sun. But beneath the quiet, war was whispering. Inside the barn, a call was already in progress. Everett stood at the long wooden table, an old secure satellite phone pressed to his ear, while June monitored the signal strength from her console nearby. Her brow was furrowed, eyes narrowed with focus. "They'll be here by nightfall," Everett said calmly into the phone. "We don't know the size, but we know they're bringing more than just eyes this time." On the other end, a voice replied, low and sure. "What's your count?" 3 vehicles came through town. 2 more unmarked units spotted on the ridge yesterday. "We intercepted a scout team. They were using contractor-grade hardware. Not cartel. Not even paramilitary. These people are trained." A long pause followed. "Then, I'll bring the rest. You'll have us before sundown." Everett ended the call. June looked up. "How many?" 4, he said. "Maybe 5 if Rigsby can break loose from the border contract." Calder, who had just entered with a satchel of gear slung over one shoulder, raised an eyebrow. "Rigsby? Last I heard, he was off the grid in Wyoming building bunkers for paranoid millionaires." "Still is," Everett said. "But the right voice tends to wake the right people." By midday, Alder Creek felt different. The cafe was nearly empty. Gas station lights were off. The local mechanic shop, usually open 6 days a week, had its bay doors locked. The people of the valley weren't foolish. They had seen this kind of pressure before, though not quite like this. They knew when the shadows were growing longer. And most of all, they knew when to stay out of the way. Hazel Lorne, the deputy with quiet courage, made her rounds with practiced calm. She didn't wear her badge today. Just a pair of jeans, a windbreaker, and a leather holster tucked under her arm. Her patrol vehicle idled behind the general store as she sat inside, binoculars in her lap, watching the black van parked 2 blocks away. Watching the man inside it speak into a handset, stare at a tablet, then look toward the hills, toward Everett's land. Meanwhile, on the farm, preparations continued. Calder and Shaw set up signal jammers along the southern tree line. Lightweight, battery-powered, and directional, capable of interrupting drone communications without drawing too much attention. The 2 men worked like clock hands, synchronized without speaking. Up on the ridge, Everett and June dug in a series of camouflage positions. Sniper hides layered into the slope with brush, clay and natural stone. Shaw had already tested sight lines from each. Every inch of the property was accounted for, mapped, and quietly rigged to resist an invasion. Not to win a war, but to survive the first blow. Inside the farmhouse, old habits returned. Maps were rolled up and secured in waterproof tubes. Food and medical supplies were repacked, condensed, labeled. Firearms cleaned and laid out with quiet reverence. June took inventory while Everett checked ammunition levels, his hands moving methodically, not rushed but precise, as though every bullet mattered. And it did. In a side room, Tundra lay curled on a blanket, her ears twitching at the occasional footstep. She had grown quieter, more alert. Her instincts had sharpened in tandem with the tension that now filled every inch of the air. As the sun began to drop, the first of the reinforcements arrived. A white cargo van with mismatched panels rolled to a stop behind the barn. Out stepped a woman in her 40s, lean and sharp-eyed, with a duffel over one shoulder and a long case in the other hand. "Lena," Everett said with a nod. "Didn't expect you to drive the surveillance rig yourself." "Didn't trust anyone else," she replied. "Had to punch a guy in Kansas who tried to open the back door. Told him it was full of snakes." Calder laughed. "You haven't changed." She dropped the duffel at his feet. "Neither have you." Behind her came a dark green pickup with Oregon plates. Inside were two more, Elias and Noor, both former spec ops, both quiet as dusk. No introductions were needed. Everyone knew what the stakes were. Everett gathered them in the barn and spoke with the calm tone of someone who had led others into worse. "They're coming tonight or early morning. We've set the first layer of defense. The outer trail is wired. The middle line is covered with scatter points. We have no air support, no outside help, and no guarantee that anyone will come looking for us." Noor spoke first, her voice quiet. "What are we protecting, exactly? I mean, besides your home." Everett paused, looking over the map. "This property," he said, "isn't just a farm. It sits on a hard point, a crossover in old transit corridors, used in the Cold War. Ignored now, but it's still a thread in the fabric. And someone wants to cut that thread to move something bigger through the gap. Drugs, weapons, information. I don't know exactly, but I do know this. If they take this land, they open a gate." Elias leaned forward. "And if we stop them, they'll try again, somewhere else. But not here. Not this valley. Not tonight." As dusk melted into night, the team moved into position. Each had a station. Each had a job. And in the dark corners of the hills, the enemy crept closer. Just past midnight, the forest came alive. Distant lights, soft and crawling, crept up the hills from the southwest. No headlights. No engines loud enough to carry far. But Everett could see the movement from his perch above the field. Through night vision lenses, they looked like ants with purpose. Slow, quiet, armed. He keyed the radio just once. "Company." One word was all it took. Across the property, safeties clicked off. Shadows shifted into place. And in the quiet heart of Alder Creek, a war began with no declaration. Chapter 6. The first sound was not a shot. It was the faint crackle of a branch, far too deliberate to be wind. Then silence. So heavy, so total, it felt unnatural, like the land itself had stopped breathing. From his hidden position on the northern slope, Everett Langley waited. His cheek pressed against the cold stock of the rifle, the barrel nestled into a hollow of brush and pine. Through the lens, green-tinted and sharp, he watched three silhouettes move along the trail below. They were spaced apart with military precision, scanning the trees, checking each hollow. But they didn't see him. He exhaled slowly, then clicked the mic once. Two quick chirps returned, from Lena, stationed in the blind above the old mill trail. The signal was clear. Contact on multiple flanks. The enemy was testing every angle. This wasn't a raid. It was a coordinated advance. In the barn, Calder crouched behind the hay bales that now concealed more than tools. The floor had been retrofitted with pressure panels and trip-sprung defense systems, invisible until needed. Around him, crates of gear sat open, his hands moving like clockwork over the final wiring of a thermal-triggered flash grid along the entry path. Shaw, positioned to the south, radioed in. 6 bodies heading for the fence. No formation. Casual clothing, but too smooth. Civvies with purpose. "They're trying to look like locals," June murmured back from her post, seated behind a bank of monitors in the lower farmhouse. "But they're not from here," Everett said. He could tell from the way they walked. Strangers always held their breath, when they stepped into a quiet place. They were listening too hard, and they'd never truly blend. Not here. Not in Alder Creek. 200 yards out, a drone buzzed softly over the treetops. It hovered for less than 3 seconds before it dipped to get a read on the field, and pop. A pulse-fired net shot from the upper silo, triggered by Shaw's signal. The drone dropped with a faint clatter, caught and tangled. The men on the trail paused. One pulled a radio. Everett could just make out the murmur. Drone's down. They saw it. Proceed anyway. Orders. No hesitation. He clicked the mic once more, one sharp press, and then the world shifted. It began not with bullets, but with light. A flare ignited near the old well, blinding white and high-pitched. A disorientation trap meant to slow without killing. The first man on the trail dropped his weapon as he reeled backward, clutching at his helmet. The second ran toward him, straight into one of Calder's scatter mines. Not an explosive, a compressed sound grenade. It detonated with a concussive whomp that threw him backward into a tangle of roots. From the trees above, Shaw's voice came calmly over the comms. 2 down. Third retreated. Back at the ridge, Everett adjusted his aim as a fourth figure appeared, trying to flank from the west. He held his breath, counted the seconds between the wind gusts, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle cracked. The man dropped, clutching his leg, not dead but stopped. Everett didn't wait for applause. He shifted scope lines to the next movement and clicked again, a silent signal to June. Inside the farmhouse, she activated the magnetic pulse unit beneath the southern fence line. Across 50 feet of ground, every communication device held by the enemy buzzed and died. Now they were blind. 10 minutes passed in near silence. No further movement. Just trees swaying gently, and the faint sound of wounded men groaning softly beyond the tree-line. Calder moved through the lower pasture like a ghost, retrieving one of the scatter mines and repositioning it closer to the ridge. He didn't need orders. They all knew the pattern. Hit, scatter, reassess. They were never the loud team. Never the ones charging in. Spectre and his crew were the ones who waited for the storm to come, and quietly made sure it broke the wrong way. Back in the barn, Lena flicked through signal frequencies. "I'm getting bleed," she said. "Low band intercept. They're calling out. Backup's inbound. Estimated 6 minutes." "How many?" Everett asked. "Hard to say. 2 vehicles. Heavier loadout. These won't be scouts." June clicked on the interior map. "We hold the middle line." "Not yet," Everett said. "We bleed the next wave." 5 minutes later, the new arrivals came fast and hard. 2 matte black SUVs crested the eastern trail, tires chewing through gravel. No headlights. Just momentum. Tactical teams leapt out before the vehicles even stopped. For in each, full gear body armor, high-end comms. Not the local buyout crew. Not even scouts. These were sweepers. "Eyes on," Shaw radioed. "They're moving for a pincer." "Hold position," Everett replied. Inside the farmhouse, June activated the ambient playback rig, a system they had jerry-rigged from old speakers and false noise feeds. In seconds, a recording of panicked movement echoed from the north fence, a distraction. 2 of the sweepers turned immediately, veering toward the false sound. Right into the trench zone. Calder hit the first switch. 3 units of terrain collapsed in a controlled slide. Not enough to kill, but enough to drop both men into a gully they didn't see. The dirt swallowed them. Shaw was already in motion, sliding down the ridge in practiced silence. He hit the edge of the ditch just as one man tried to climb out. A quick blow to the helmet, and the man went limp. The second froze. Shaw didn't speak, just pointed the barrel of his weapon downward. The man laid flat and didn't move. "Middle team's pushing the field," Lena said from her perch. Straight into the crop rows. Everett adjusted scope again. He recognized the lead. The same man who'd stood at his gate days ago. Clean jacket. Dark sunglasses. Too calm. He was here now in black tactical gear. But Everett didn't need the glasses to recognize a stare. He waited. Watched. The man raised a fist. Stopped the advance. Then, he looked up. Right at Everett. The stare lingered. And then the man spoke, not through a comm, but aloud. "Mr. Langley," he called. "We're not here for a war." His voice carried oddly in the quiet. "We're here for the crossroads." Everett's trigger finger tightened, but didn't move. The man continued. "This land is a relic, an intersection. Your name is on the deed, but the future is in the ground beneath it. You can't stop progress." Everett replied with only 5 words. "This isn't your future's ground. and he clicked the mic. Calder knew what that meant. The barn lights flared. Floods on the west field activated, turning night into an ocean of white. Every motion sensor flare popped. Every hidden trap hummed. The enemy team scattered, some dropping weapons, others stumbling back into shadows they didn't know were rigged. Chaos. And then silence again. Half an hour later, the fields were quiet. 2 enemies captured, for fled into the trees. 3 unconscious, patched and tied, awaiting extraction. Everett stepped down from his perch and made his way to the barn. His team was waiting. Lena had already pulled the SAT data from the downed team's gear. June was scanning the chip for metadata. Calder leaned back against a beam, hands filthy, but eyes alight with focus. "They won't stop," June said quietly. "No," Everett agreed. "But they'll remember what happened here." He looked around the barn, at the team he hadn't seen together in nearly 10 years. Not a word of celebration passed between them. Just the quiet understanding that they had made their stand. And that tomorrow, the war might return. Chapter 7. The morning after the firefight rose slow and reluctant, as if the land itself hesitated to move. Mist clung low over Alder Creek's fields like a wool blanket pulled tight. Dew shimmered on fence posts, on tree limbs, and on the steel barrels resting just beyond the barn doors. Weapons that had not yet been returned to their hiding places. Inside the farmhouse, the silence was heavier than usual. Not ominous, just full. Full of everything that had happened in the dark hours before. Everett Langley stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the blood from his hands. Not his own. One of the men they'd patched up, a clean bullet wound through the thigh. He'd been stabilized by June and laid out on the floor of the barn, arms bound, eyes watchful. Everett's eyes were distant as the water ran red, then pink, then clear. Tundra stood behind him, silent as always, her eyes trained on the door. Across the room, Lena sat with a mug of coffee growing cold in her hands. The others had trickled in one by one, Shaw Calder, nor Elias. Their movements were slow, careful, not out of exhaustion, but out of the reverence that comes when you survive a night you weren't sure you'd walk through. No one spoke right away. There was nothing to celebrate. They gathered later in the barn. June had her laptop open, wires running from the hard drive she'd pulled from one of the sweeper's comm units. The screen was lined with data strings, most of it encrypted, some of it corrupted. But a few fragments had survived. She projected them onto the wall, lines of black and white satellite imagery, mapping terrain corridors stretching from Alder Creek all the way to the northern border. "These aren't local operations," she said. "This is national, maybe international." Calder squinted at the screen. "What are they transporting?" "Unknown. But it's not just weapons or narcotics. These kinds of corridors, they don't risk this much for something they can already move through back channels." Lena added, "Some of the code tags reference level, 9 transit, and funnel coordinates. That's above corporate clearance." Everett watched silently from the corner, then finally said, "They're trying to set up a ghost lane." June nodded. "Looks like it. A route so quiet it doesn't even ping satellite flags. They use these to move highly sensitive assets, people, tech, intel. Stuff they can't risk anywhere else. And your land," Nor said softly, "is at the center of it." Everett exhaled through his nose. "That's why they want it. Not because it's pretty. Because it's invisible." For a moment, they just looked at the map. The threads of terrain, the notations in classified jargon, the overlapping sectors that painted Alder Creek not as a home, but as a node. A vital intersection in a hidden system. Later that afternoon, Hazel Lorne arrived at the edge of the farm. She didn't drive in, just walked the last half-mile, boots crunching over dirt and fallen needles. She found Everett sitting beneath the old windmill, Tundra at his side, both of them watching the horizon like it had something to confess. "I saw the news," she said, without greeting. "Power outages. A lightning storm. Supposed equipment malfunction caused a military convoy to be rerouted last night." Everett didn't look at her. "Convenient story." Hazel crouched beside him. "Was it your story?" "No," he said, "but it was written for people like you. People who still need to believe that nothing's broken." She nodded slowly. "You hurt them. We stopped them." Hazel looked over the fields, eyes distant. "And when they come back?" Everett didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Then we'll do what's needed. Again, and again if we must." Hazel stood. "People in town are asking questions. You should let them." She tilted her head. "You're not worried?" Everett shook his head. "No one will believe the truth. And those who suspect it won't want it confirmed. She looked down at him. You still believe you can hold them off forever? No, he said softly. But I can make it cost them something. And sometimes that's enough. As twilight arrived, the mood on the property shifted again. Not fear, not anger, just preparation. The prisoners had been taken by nightfall, unmarked black vans rolling up the western slope, collecting the wounded without speaking a word to anyone. They hadn't returned fire. They hadn't threatened, just gathered their own and vanished. It meant one thing: a message had been received. But Everett knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. They would be back. Next time more carefully. Next time more quietly. That night, the team shared a quiet meal in the barn. Canned beans, cornbread, black coffee. The sort of meal Everett had lived on during deployments that went months without a clear end. Elias leaned back against a beam and said, "Feels familiar." Nor smiled faintly. "Except we sleep in beds now." June glanced at Everett. "How long do we stay?" "As long as it takes," he said. Calder sipped from his tin cup. "So the rest of our lives, then." No one laughed. But no one left. After midnight, Everett stood alone on the ridge again, the rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the woods below. The wind was low. The trees whispered softly to one another. Tundra lay beside him, her ears twitching at small sounds. From the town, a distant train horn echoed across the valley, one of the last passenger lines in the region, still running twice a week. A sound Everett had always associated with simpler things. But there was nothing simple now. Only the land, the quiet, the breath before the next movement. He looked to the sky, where stars had finally broken through the clouds. And in the hush of that late hour, with his rifle resting against the earth and his heartbeat finally slowing, Everett allowed himself one thought. This land is not mine, but it is my responsibility. Chapter 8. The days that followed were quieter. Not empty, just watchful. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm, when every leaf seems to hold its breath, and even the birds choose not to sing too loud. On the surface, Alder Creek appeared unchanged. The hills were still green, the creek still murmured through the rocks, and Everett Langley's fields still stretched wide beneath an open sky. But everyone on the property knew. This was an interlude, not an ending. In the mornings, Everett walked the fence line with Tundra, a mug of coffee in one hand and a pair of binoculars slung from his shoulder. The repairs were subtle, tripwire paths rerouted, sensors repositioned, the crushed grass where a skirmish had taken place now hidden beneath a layer of fresh straw. He paused often listening. The wind, the trees, the quiet. Then he'd move on, checking every inch of land like a man tending sacred ground. Inside the barn, June worked like a cipher, her hands dancing between devices. She'd isolated a fragment of code from one of the sweeper's comms, a boot protocol buried in a satellite ping. Not for tracking, for something else. It's not just movement data, she explained that afternoon. It's logistics, cargo mapping, routes, drop points, weights, timestamps. Everett leaned over her shoulder. Shipments. June nodded. But not documented. Not government. Someone's moving high-grade material through that corridor you're sitting on. This land is the anchor. If they get it, they finish the loop. What kind of material? Lena asked from the shadows of the loft. June's eyes didn't leave the screen. Not weapons. Not drugs. Then what? She tapped a line of corrupted text. Biometric containers. The room went still. Elias exhaled slowly. You mean people? No, June replied. I mean something worse. That night, Everett sat alone beneath the oak tree near the creek's bend, a place he hadn't visited since before his wife died. It had once been her favorite spot. She'd sit there in the evenings, sketching, reading, sometimes just watching the light fall through the trees. He sat in her place now, his back against the thick trunk, the air cool against his skin. He tried not to think of war, but it had a way of finding him. In the sound of a twig snapping where it shouldn't. In the hum of a low-flying drone trying to mask itself behind cricket song. In the half-familiar scent of rubber and oil drifting faintly through the grass. He closed his eyes and listened. The creak, the drone, the shift in wind. Then a footstep. Not far, not hurried, intentional. He didn't move, not at first. Just opened his eyes and let them adjust. At the edge of the trees, a figure stood. Not military, not armored, civilian clothes. A jacket too clean for this place. No weapon visible. But that meant nothing. Everett stood. Tundra emerged from the brush beside him like a specter. The figure raised one hand, palm open, fingers spread. "Mr. Langley," the man said, his voice low. Not a shout, just enough to carry. "I come alone." Everett said nothing. "I'm not here to fight," the man continued. "I'm here to offer terms." That made Everett's brow rise just slightly. The man stepped closer, cautiously, like approaching a sleeping bear. "I represent the interests of the route," he said. "What you call the corridor. What we call the arc." Everett's eyes narrowed. "You've lost the right to call it anything. You've made your point. But points can't stop inevitability." "Inevitability," Everett repeated, like the word tasted sour, "is just the excuse cowards give to bullies." The man didn't flinch. "You're not our enemy, Mr. Langley. You were once like us. You still are, in ways." "No," Everett said. "I used to believe in something. That's not the same." The man looked tired suddenly, not weak, but burdened, like a man sent to deliver a message he didn't write. "There's a future coming," he said. "You can't stop it. You can only choose your place in it." Everett stepped forward. "I already have." The two men stood in silence. Then the visitor reached into his coat. Tundra growled, low, dangerous. The man froze, hand halfway to his pocket. "Just paper," he said softly. Everett gave a slight nod. Slowly, the man pulled a folded envelope from his coat and held it out. Everett took it. The paper was thick, embossed with a sigil Everett didn't recognize, a triangle inside a ring. No agency name, no stamp, no return address. He didn't open it. The man said, "You'll want to read that." Then he turned, walked into the trees, and disappeared. Everett stood there a while. The wind shifted. Tundra sniffed the ground, then sat. Neither of them spoke. Back at the house, Everett laid the envelope on the table. He didn't open it that night. Not yet. June stared at it like it was a puzzle already halfway solved. "They sent a diplomat," she said. "They sent a threat in soft leather," Lena muttered. "Same thing." Everett ran a hand down his beard. "They're adjusting their strategy. Doesn't mean they're backing off." Elias agreed. "This is what they do when brute force fails. They wrap the knife in velvet." June asked quietly, "Will you read it?" "Eventually," Everett said. "But not tonight." He looked around at the team, their faces lit by soft lamplight, their shadows long on the walls. "They came here for something that doesn't belong to them. Whatever they say next won't change that." Calder leaned back. "You think they'll try again tomorrow?" "No," Everett said. "They'll wait." "How long?" "As long as it takes to make us believe they're gone." A long silence followed. Outside, the wind blew again, this time colder. A new season turning. Chapter 9. The envelope remained unopened on Everett Langley's kitchen table for 2 days. Not out of fear, but out of principle. In a world where words were too often twisted, Everett had learned to listen first to the silence. The stillness around the threat always told more than the threat itself. And in the 2 days following that strange conversation at the creek's bend, the land held its breath. No vehicles, no scouts, no drones humming through the trees. Nothing but the normal rhythms of Alder Creek. Woodpeckers tapping at bark, the wind pulling through dry grass, the rustle of deer in the distance. It was almost enough to make someone relax. But Everett never did. Shaw spent those quiet days rebuilding his hides along the ridge. He didn't speak much. Just cut branches with practiced silence, lined his blinds with earth and pine, and watched. Calder ran quiet drills with Elias, setting and resetting low-visibility traps, trip lines, flare wires. The two moved through the trees like wolves born in different packs, but hunting in perfect sync. Nor ran recon loops into town, unarmed, hood up, using back trails only locals knew. She came back with simple updates. No sign of them in town. Gas station manned. Cafe running. Hazel still watching from the shadows, though she no longer wore her badge on her belt. "They've gone underground again," Nor said softly over breakfast, pouring black coffee into a tin cup. "They're not gone. Just watching." Inside the barn, June poured through the data chip again. What she found this time wasn't code. It was a name. One word buried in the metadata tags. Peregrine. She brought it to Everett that afternoon. They stood in the shade beside the silo, June holding the tablet, Everett watching the sky like he expected something to fall from it. "Ever heard of it?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Once. Maybe. Years ago. During a debrief in Kandahar." "What was it?" He didn't answer at first. Then finally he said, something that was supposed to stay in the basement of the Pentagon. Something too quiet to be real and too dangerous to be ignored. June's eyes narrowed. "Black program. Not black, he said. Buried. The kind that funds itself. The kind that eats up entire operations to keep itself hidden. Military. No, Everett said. Not officially. She turned the screen off. They're not just moving product. They're moving something connected to this. Something buried. Everett looked toward the east, toward the hills that marked the edge of his property. Then toward the barn. Then down to the ground, as if trying to see beneath it. They've built their road, he said. This land is the keystone. They've been laying the foundation for longer than we've been watching. He took a breath. And finally, he picked up the envelope. He opened it alone. At the kitchen table, late that night. Everyone else asleep, or pretending to be. The seal snapped quietly, a clean tear of paper. Inside, a single folded sheet. No heading, no logo, no signature. Typed. Anonymous. He read it once. Then again. There were no direct threats. No ultimatums. Just an offer. The kind that only comes from people who've never been told no. Your land is of significance. You can retain it. Operate as caretaker. Compensation guaranteed. Oversight will be minimal. Cooperation will ensure safety, yours and others. The last line was the only one that felt real. Refusal will be interpreted as obstruction. Obstruction will be resolved. Everett folded the page and lit a match. The paper curled in the flame, blackened at the corners, and drifted into ash in the sink. At sunrise, he called the team together. They gathered at the edge of the south field, where the fence bordered the trail that led to the mill road. The same trail where the first scouts had appeared. The same fence where the first offer had been left. He stood beside a canvas-covered frame. When he pulled it back, the group saw what he'd been working on in secret, a stone marker. Cut by hand, chiseled with care. Sturdy, simple, grounded. On its face were words etched deep. No roads here. He looked at each of them, one by one. I've made my choice, he said. They call this place a node, a corridor, a crossing, but to me it's still just home. He placed a hand on the stone. They don't get to build through it. Not with money. Not with soldiers. Not with threats in nice coats. June stepped forward first. Then Calder. Then Shaw. No one spoke. They just stood with him, side by side, in silence. A kind of silence that wasn't fear or fatigue. It was finality. That night, a message came. Not on paper. Not over radio. But in fire. At the far end of the trail, beyond the southern rise, a blaze lit the horizon. Orange. Flickering. Controlled. They had set something alight. An old hunting cabin, maybe. Or one of the outbuildings just beyond town. A warning. No movement followed. No gunfire. No words. Just that quiet fire, burning against the dark like a match held beneath a fuse. Everett stood on the porch and watched it until it died. Nor joined him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They're coming again, aren't they? Yes, he said. When? Soon. She looked at him. Do we run? He didn't turn. No. We finish it. Chapter 10. The final day began the same as many others, with mist curling low over the hills and the first fingers of light gently brushing the tops of the trees. But in Alder Creek, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like a pause, the kind you take before a heavy door opens, before the past and the future meet. Inside the barn, Everett Langley stood over a map with a pen in hand. He was circling paths they had already fortified, traps that had already been sprung, and fallback zones marked with quiet urgency. The rest of the team filtered in around him. Lena with her eyes tired but sharp, Calder checking gear, June with her laptop and last-minute intel. Shaw and Nor arrived from the ridge, silent as usual, carrying the weight of what they'd seen. There's movement, Shaw said. Farther out than before. East and west. Could be decoys. Could be all of it, Everett murmured. They're folding in. June tapped a key. Intercepted one comm burst before it went dark. Call sign Operation Clearinghouse. No names. No locations. Just this phrase repeated. Remove the node. Calder glanced up. Sounds like a cleaning crew. Or a hammer, Everett said. One meant to leave nothing behind. At noon, the quiet cracked. A vibration first, through the soil, through the still grass, through the spine. Then came the sound. Low, distant, rolling. Engines. Heavy ones. More than before. Lena's voice came through the radio. 2 transports. Modified. Armored sides. Not SUVs. These are built for pressure. Personnel or payload? Everett asked. Could be both. She paused. Third vehicle behind them. smaller. Tactical command. Everett exhaled. This is it. They approached with intent. No subterfuge. No pretense of diplomacy. Just metal rolling across gravel. Dust spiraling behind them like ghosts rising from the dirt. Calder and Shaw were already in place along the upper trench. June manned the control station below the farmhouse, every trigger and sensor wired through a web of relays and redundancy. Elias and Nor held the west tree line, tucked beneath foliage, rifles resting steady, hearts slower than fear. Everett waited on the porch. As he had from the beginning, Tundra sat beside him. The truck stopped 50 yards from the house. Out stepped 8 men, full tactical. Not scouts, not contractors. Soldiers, real ones, but not flying a flag. No unit insignia, just blank gear and matching gait. One stepped forward, face obscured behind tinted goggles. "Mr. Langley," he said. "You know who I am," Everett replied. "That's the only reason you're not moving yet." "We don't have to move," the man said. "We just have to erase." "You've tried that already." The man looked around. "You've cost us time, equipment, personnel. You've proven your point." "I'm not interested in making a point," Everett said. "I'm interested in holding ground. You don't own the ground. No one does. But some of us care for it." The man didn't respond. Instead, he gave a hand signal, and the assault began. They came fast. 2 squads fanned out, sweeping wide to flank the barn. 2 more moved straight for the farmhouse. But this time, Everett didn't wait. From the ridge, Shaw triggered the first sequence, a pattern of scatter bursts that broke their formation, forcing them into the open. Calder lit the field traps, flashes of white-hot magnesium and concussive air charges that knocked one team back into their own transport. June flooded the approach path with sonar pulses, overloading their comms, disrupting their formation. Nor and Elias took the high ground and began coordinated fire. Not to kill, but to break rhythm, to confuse. 1 man fell. 2 others scrambled for cover. They'd come with confidence, but they weren't ready for what met them. This wasn't a homestead. This was a battlefield disguised as a memory. Everett moved through the lower house like a shadow, shotgun in hand, his breath steady. At the front door, Tundra growled, then lunged. A man trying to breach from the side went down with a scream, weapon clattering to the dirt. Everett didn't look, just kept walking. The others would handle the rest. He had a different destination. He made his way to the barn. There, inside a chamber most thought was just a storage pit, he reached beneath the floorboards and lifted the last box. A small transmitter. Old, unregistered, untraceable. It had been given to him 20 years ago by someone who owed him a life. A one-time favor. He flicked it on. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a signal lit up. No words, just a location. The firefight outside faded. Not because the attackers won, but because they stopped, falling back, dragging wounded, losing formation. Elias and Nor emerged from the trees like ghosts. Shaw and Calder moved in to push the rest out. Within 15 minutes, the field was clear. Smoke curled over broken brush. Silence returned, and so did the wind. An hour later, a second convoy arrived. But not with enemies. Not with guns. Just one helicopter. Low emission. Quiet. Dark green, unmarked. It landed in the field without warning. From it stepped a man in a long coat. Middle-aged. Pale. Unimpressed. Everett met him at the porch. "You called," the man said. Everett nodded. "I burned the letter. I assumed. You owe me one." "I do," the man said. "And you've collected it." He looked over the field. "They'll send no one else." "For how long?" "Long enough." Everett's jaw tightened. "I need it in writing." "You won't get it." "Then stay here and watch it." The man smiled faintly. "No, but I'll tell them this. The node is compromised. The cost too high. They'll shift." Everett nodded once, and turned away. That night, the fire in the farmhouse burned brighter than usual. The team gathered in the kitchen, quiet, steady, tired. No cheers. Just the clink of metal cups, the scrape of boots on old floorboards. "You think they'll ever try again?" Calder asked. June shrugged. "If they do, they won't walk in." "Not through us," Nor said. Everett didn't answer. He looked out the window, where the stars blinked faintly behind the drifting smoke. Weeks passed, then months. The fields grew again. The town returned to itself. The name Langley faded from whispers and back into ordinary. And Everett? He still walked the land every morning with Tundra at his side. But now he carried no rifle, just a worn cap, a slow step, and a promise. The land had nearly been lost, but not while he stood on it, and not while others like him still remembered what it meant to hold a line, even when no one else believed it mattered.